Uh, this is something that I'm going to have to sort of cite carefully and properly. The constitutional court case about the public protector not being able to obtain tax records of a private individual after not going through regular channels which exist within the law, but instead trying to essentially trouse the law, trying to trump up some kind of supreme constitutional power that emboldens the public protector to somewhat act unilaterally beyond existing structures that she avoided, uh, uh, that she circumvented in merely ignoring, um, and how she conducted her affairs in a haphazard way and such. And then she had a cost order uh, uh, made in a judgment against her, um, and now she is appealing straight to the Constitutional Court without going through a full bench of the High Court or the Supreme Court of Appeals. And she takes issue with being essentially scolded in the cost order against her. And the Constitutional Court has not given a ruling yet on this matter. I'll say tentatively that they should have given a ruling by the time that I released this. Um, so that won't be an issue uh, of being in breach of um, commenting on or opining on what is sub judice, but the the comments that the Constitutional Court has made in hearing this, already I can tell from, it is ill-conceived already. The whole thing is framed in such, they just give automatic sympathy um, to this public protector who does not deserve the title or the role or the function. And let me just say what is wrong about the comments that were made in essentially uh, disagreeing with the contents of the cost order. Um, the kind of the strange kind of hypothetical skepticism, the kind of the devil's advocate kind of interpretation of what is being implied by that having bad consequences, and therefore it was a bad construction within the cost order, a bad construction of an argument to make, or of or a bad thing to have been uttered um, in that original ruling. And then to go on to say that the public protector was merely following the advice of her legal advice, and so she is obviously, if her action fails and is problematic, it's not for her, it's for her legal counsel, essentially, because can't we all just say that we're following legal advice? This is what is ill-conceived. This is, if I might add as well, slightly disgusting. Um, the public protector, in terms of their role and function, they at least have to, as the integrity of their office is premised on it, has to the actual person who holds the seat of that function of the public protector has to underwrite the actions taken, the legal steps taken by the office. If she can't even do that, then so if you can say, oh, the public protector is just like anyone else who just does what everyone else does, on the advice of their legal counsel, because they are just like lay people. The public protector is not a lay person. How can you compare them to everyone else? That is ill conceived, And that's from the so-called Chief Justice himself. I shouldn't say so-called. I mean, that is his title now. I mean, I say that because I've got arguments as to why uh, I find it disgusting that they had to invent that title. President of the Constitutional Court, I thought, was dignified enough and was rightfully separate from the political process. But this ideologue who has corrupted the Constitution by his interpretation of an anti-racist racializing of a non-racialist document, a corrupting of the values of non-racialism. I mean, so Chief Justice Mogoeng has enough to answer for, but I mean, I guess this is just another example in the long line of essentially delusional filter of law and to fit some kind of prescribed ideological vision that essentially you know the conclusion that you want to make and the reasoning follows afterwards in a post hoc fashion that you find, it's basically a kind of political partisan. All you have to do is infer and project onto people the right intentions linked with the right visionary outcomes that are the ostensible purport of the measures taken. As long as people are read to have the right intentions, they are on the right side of Chief Justice Mogoeng. If they are read as having the wrong ideological intentions, any criminality essentially or unconstitutionality can be interpreted and imputed onto them. Where there's no strict chain of principles and values that are conserved, as he has already destroyed non-racialism in practice. The Constitution stands betrayed and undermined. Anyway, these are somewhat separable issues, but one can see the poisonous fruit of immorality, the pollution of this ideological immorality, and how it develops this disgusting form of legal positivism, of this legal theory that is capable of reinterpreting reality to fit the design of the imagination, which is very similar to the racial imagination, the racist imagination, the imagination of particular racists who essentially call themselves anti-racist now, because they just label it thus, and they label those who disagree with them racist, and then they will find excuses to suppress any dissent. As accountability itself and responsibility becomes a kind of mutable, malleable thing to be redirected and dispersed in an ad hoc fashion, that any amount of rationalization can just be generated at will, can just be synthesized as needed to continue the train of this slow motion train wreck in progress that calls itself progress, but it's the progression of a train wreckage, a train accident occurring in slow motion. That's exactly what it is, and it keeps on having to find scapegoats to blame and find convoluted excuses. I mean, I guess that's why at this point, when I read the article, judgment is reserved, because they have to work out what convoluted reasoning they're going to apply to the circumstance to unsully the ideological cohort, because these are two birds of a feather essentially. They sing from the same ideological machination, from the same corruption, the same moral corruption, and it is that moral corruption which will always essentially provide haven for the style of state corruption, of governmental mismanagement, because these are reflections of the same thing. The one is the pollution, Well, the state corruption is the pollution from the moral from the moral corruption. Anyway, I guess that's an it's an interesting little picture, I guess, of the state of perversion and debauchery that we live in a dead constitution. And the real question is, can it be recovered? Can it be resurrected? And not without confronting the truth about what has gone on, about what has transpired. Because if we don't admit that, then there'll be no hope of re-establishing common values and standards and principles and shared ethics and a possibility of an ethical framework that even that can be re-established in order to energize a functioning state, which is right now laden and baked in with this ideological corruption, the excuse for any amount, essentially, of gerrymandering. And it's the rule of man, it's not the rule of law, because well, that's the quality of the sort of stuff that we're going to see. I mean, that's how that sort of that legal positivism works, is that they just elaborate and interpret it to the point at which it the intentions are in lockstep, and so all they have to do is telepathically divine your intentions, and then your guilt is confirmed already by their external authority. The dignity is vested in and apportioned by the moral consideration, controlled by the identity and controlled by the ideological representation of that identity. And that idolatry is the source of all their gerrymandered thinking and decision making and planning. And the baked in immorality in that will always create pollution, and then they just I mean, essentially, it's such a feeble framework as well, that without a scapegoat, without, because I mean, it's fueled on a vengeance ideology, or on a kind of a spite, sadistically edged orientation to reality. And so without orientating itself around an adversary like that, they have no way of delineating anything in some sense, because they need a place to sort of pollute. They need something to make desolate. They need something to extract from. They're kind of like codependent with a and that is the style in which they operate. And so they cover themselves, they cover each other, they wash each other's hands clean of their dirty work of constructing this disgusting legal positivism, which is an affront to the concept of law itself, which is an affront to the concept of the founding constitutional values, which have been utterly reinterpreted and betrayed. Prime among them, non-racialism, has been utterly undermined, and social justice has come to mean its opposite. Social justice for the individual now means social justice for the identity. Moral consideration is vested only in the identity. It's robbed from the individual. And where has that left the poor of this country? To share in an identity that plutocrats use, so that they can use the poor as a human shield to advance the causes of the identity, and which can only be enjoyed by representatives, therefore, of that identity, as the state does nothing to specifically tackle disadvantage, because it cannot, because the law has been corrupted and reformed in order to orientate itself towards serving the identity. And so the interest of the identity, morality, is reframed in that perversion. And so problems of actual challenges of within disadvantage cannot even be identified. They cannot even be targeted, because they run counter. Because essentially you ask these ideologues a basic sort of question: is the main problem that we face, is it specific challenges to specific people on the ground or specific sets of people on the ground that require tangible, specific plans of action to ameliorate specific issues? Or is the problem systemic oppression? And then they will give you, they will have a mealy mouthed sort of bullshit answer, and then they will say, well, it's both. And then will you say, well, if you have to pick one, pick one. And then they'll say, I can't, it's both, it's the same. Um, or maybe they'll even admit that, oh yeah, I think the problem is systemic oppression, that's the main one. Well, how do you tackle it if you don't do specific things to tackle it? So you have to do specific things on specific issues. No, but somehow they'll say that it's both, that that the one relates to the other in some kind of separate but equal way. You know, the kind of that sort of convoluted racist thinking, separate but equal. Um, that weird bit of fuzzy logic that's used to paper over the gap in the reasoning. That people have to believe in something, in this disembodied identitarian generalization sort of pride games, that people have to extract their dignity from some kind of generalized pride about their group, you know, disgusting racialist trash, disgusting racialist dogma. Uh, is completely infused into their worldview. But so then let's just say that you push them if they say, well, it's both, and they're not willing to show, they're not willing to reveal the obvious sort of paradox that if they say that it's a higher priority to tackle systemic oppression than to do tangible things to fix problems on the ground, then, you know, like, obviously their priorities are in the wrong order, or their mentality is not orientated towards actually affecting positive results. It's ideological, it's abstracted, it's disembodied, it's centered on some imaginary thing, uh, foremost on some strange ideological thing, with strange ideological premises. So if you can't get them to prioritize to doing specific tangible things, and then, because you see, if you can ever get them to say, okay, yes, it is the priority to do specific tangible things, then you can actually have a debate about what those specific tangible things should be and how they should function and what the best way to do it is and what's actually effective or ineffective. And we can surely say that everything that South Africa has done has not been optimally effective, and it has been regressive. We have not had growth. I mean, we're a developing nation. Any developing nation should essentially have growth of somewhat north perhaps of 4%. I mean, it's almost like, you know, all you need is a well-meaning government that isn't essentially orientated around a kind of racialist musical chairs economic cannibalism that has maimed, and I mean, you know, and then you get disgusting race-baiting things like the president complaining about how too many white people are employed compared to how many black people are unemployed. I mean, I think that's slightly unfair on a large scale as well, because there's something that doesn't show up in the white employment figures, and that would be the missing section of the population. I mean, how do you account for them? I mean, surely, you know, they at least were also, or perhaps still are, a lot of them South African citizens. They're not employed here. I mean, have they philanthropically vacated the scene because of the racialist musical chairs things? I mean, where has our growth gone? Where has our job opportunities gone? Where has the growth in the economy gone? I mean, I think a lot of it has gone because of that departed section of the population. The brain drain, the loss of capital in the form of human capital, of skills, of know-how, of potential coordinating. I guess, and networking and coordinating that can't really happen so easily in South Africa, because the business environment is largely stultified by the red tape and the racialist accounting which is enforced, because it's hard enough to network with two people that need a certain configuration of skills when they have to play a racial accounting game all the time and work out the color of everyone's skin that's involved in their small growing network of people that depend on each other. When you have to play racialist accounting, you can't really build things from a micro scale. Only big established corporations can play those silly sorts of games, and they've got bureaucracies that are designed to do that. And so we have no innovators. We have no growth factor. We have no bottom rung of the economy that organically produces things and that could have engaged and tapped into potentials. And with growth, comes a bigger economy, comes, because we do actually have a progressive tax system, which means that, the more money there is, the more wealth there is, the more money there is to put into development and experimental developmental things, which should be about specific tackling of disadvantages. And an identity is not a fucking disadvantage. You racist fascists is what these people are. They are actually fascists. And just because we haven't seen fascism in the color of pro-black doesn't mean that that's not what they are, and doesn't mean that that isn't what their ideology is. What their ideology is exactly about. Because what is the difference between claiming genetic superiority and having mythology around blood and soil and all that, and claiming moral superiority that is inherited by the color of your skin? What is the difference? And their priestly caste, as it was the Darwinists in the academy before, is now the historians in the academy of today. And they're corrupt academics that undermine the Constitution, which should be charged with constitutional damages, which obviously would never, this is not how the law, that's how the law should function. That's not how the law functions as it has fallen, as it stands in its decrepit and debauched state in South Africa. These people have killed the new South Africa. They have killed the promise of the new South Africa. And they stand with blood on their hands, and they pass the buck of that accountability as their creed gives them no political responsibility for what they do. They call it systemic oppression. They take no responsibility for their crimes against morality, their crimes against the Constitution, which is the supreme law, which they have reinterpreted to suit their evil and vengeance-driven ideology, transforming envy into jealousy, because their personal envy can be disguised and hidden in the umbrella of what they claim their identity jealously deserves, that it deserves its pride, and that they should be able to take pride in their identity. And so whatever they privately might envy and not wish to work for, they can ideologically derive to themselves. And that kind of childish immaturity, which creates a kind of emotional narrative that can be projected onto anyone, that anyone can be part of that disgusting identitarian story, as they can have their identity race baiters and race merchants and identity mongers selling the identity to their followers as their demagogic fascistic politics has its totalitarian hold with its agenda-driven journalists, which and they all fall in line. John Matham, 567 medium wave, and they have their generation of propaganda. Journalism is also functionally dead. We don't have a free press. We have an ideologically driven style of reality manufacturing, which is exactly the same kind of manufacturing which lies in wait in this judgment that is that is being reserved at the time of this recording, but it won't be at time of me releasing this. Where actually, my YouTube channel has so little views that it could scarcely be recorded as a publicized view, I think. In fact, in some sense, my views are private communications to people who search out my opinion. I guess it would be hard to call it private. I'm not a publisher, but I am making my works available on a platform. Just trying to think if I could technically get out of the sub judice bind. The level of people who the level of viewership that I have, I'm sure is so. If it could actually be quantified, I'm sure that I guess I'll risk it, because technically, if it could actually be traced, I bet that no one would have even heard it by the time that there is actually a ruling from the Constitutional Court. And my viewership is so minuscule that it's largely irrelevant. And the points that I'm making are not really to this case. They are more broadly about the situation of the state of the health of the judiciary, or the legal theory, at least at the top, that is influencing it. And it's more a state on the it's more a comment on the state of politics in general in South Africa, or the state of politics rather. I guess you could call it, perhaps, although it's slightly strange because it's a political issue, I guess you could call it defamation of the Chief Justice, but I would be willing to defend that under the. If I was sued for defamation, I'd be willing to defend that with the counterclaim that it's true, or contesting the defamation, because truth is a defense to defamation in our legal system. And in some sense, the truth here is a political, somewhat political. So I think I would just have to make a case that I really do believe it, and that it is both that I do believe it and that it is plausible. And as long as it is plausible and I do honestly believe it, then I'm sure on those grounds it's fine. Okay, well, let me finish this recording. Yeah, that's it. Just to put a finer point on it, it's a bit grotesque and almost beyond credulity that the public protector cannot be regarded as underwriting in terms of the the discretionary power of her office is not invested in whatever case is made on behalf of her office from her representatives. Because whatever the public protector does, especially in the legal realm, is going to set precedent, which is going to essentially frame the. I mean, that's the role of the public protector. I mean, it's beyond ludicrous. I mean, that she cannot be held responsible for the particular way in which her case is argued, or the points in terms of how it is made. If she is not tracking and monitoring and evaluating the substance of the case that is being made on her behalf by her legal representatives, if she is not underwriting the legal strategy that is employed, and aware of all the other, if she is not seen as responsible for the way in which the power of her office is being represented, or is being depicted, or is being legally, uh, if legal claims are being made on behalf of that power, I mean, then what is her role as a public protector if she is not responsible for that? I mean, like, the Chief Justice is going to infantilize the public protector. I mean, this is grotesque. This is an inversion. I mean, this is the highest values devaluing themselves, if you have ever seen it. Another example of essentially the Nietzschean prophecy fulfilled. I mean, it's beyond. It's now a clown show. Basically, is what I'm spelling out. But to say as well that this is how this toxic ideology works of identity politics and the racialist worldview of the so-called anti-racists, because this is how they can confect reality. This is how they can manufacture through a highly cherry-picked and selectively, sort of sourced material in which reality can just be chopped and changed around, and you have such a selective interpretation of the facts of reality, of history. It just becomes completely malleable and pliable to your ideological vision, because you've got this emotional narrative invested into how the identity needs to be protected and what the conclusion already is. And so you've got your conclusion first, and it's whatever means it takes to arrive at that point, and then you just project on whatever you need to project on other people's intentions in order to arrive at that point, by vilifying and scapegoating and diverting responsibility, by diluting it into a systemic claim about this is the situation. It's never about someone's responsibility that they should be held accountable for. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think this is a conspicuous exposition of the style of the Chief Justice's legal positivism, which is the same style of legal positivism that strangled the justice out of Weimar Germany in its transition into the Aryan Third Reich. This is proto-fascism at its core, in its disgusting and decrepit evolution into an overtly, you can just interpret reality as you so wish. You can just elaborate the law to fit your ideological perversion of immorality, of corruption, because your emotional narrative, your emotional passive aggressiveness just needs a little bit of a drama, a little bit of a polemic that you can project onto the situation at will, post hoc. You can just manufacture it at will. And we see that because you can do anything. Because if you can recontextualize reality, you can make anything appear to be however you want it. I mean, this is how propaganda artists confect reality, and how the reporting and the activist journalists that fly the banner of this identitarian, hate-filled, hate-obsessed, vengeance ideology, they're all much of a muchness in terms of the pollution of this is usually, I mean, in its most clearest form of abuse and incoherence, comes in the legal manifestation of it. So it's most clearly, egregiously, embarrassingly debauched, in the form in which it manifests, with its dirty hands, covered in the blood of the Constitution that has been murdered by these people. And the question is, can it be recovered? Can it be resurrected? That's where we are in South African politics, essentially. But anyway, it's an open question. It's certainly worth fighting for. Other people did. The promise of the new South Africa cannot be stolen by these ideological thieves. Which require someone to swallow their poison pills, their pollution from their moral corruption. They have to find cheap and easy targets to absorb their ire of their drama-filled, concocted interpretation of reality. That helps them confirm their ideological narrative, because that's the only thing they can do. They're like pedants, stuck on repeat. And what was the public protector actually trying to do? I mean, she was trying to turn her office into, probably, this is what the ideology wants to do, I guess, is to sort of evolve into a more active sort of Gestapo, into a more, sort of an active role of political policing in some sense, that if she can accrue to herself ad hoc powers using the citing the eminence of the Constitution, that she can eventually be able to sort of, I guess what they would want to at the end of the day is to sort of create the kind of kangaroo courts around the premises of their anti-racism ideology. The ideology is not even shy about talking about this, about elaborating hate speech into essentially entrenching their ideological interpretation and vision and betrayal of the Constitution. And the kind of powers that they quite grotesquely grope for in their quite, I think the original judgment against the public protector was correct on all counts. I don't know about the implication about all the other things that she's done, but in this case, it's obviously correct, and it's utterly absurd to try to shield the public protector from the responsibility of the legal case issued on her behalf when she is the public protector and the case involves a constitutional matter. It's beyond. It's like just invoking this identitarian sacred cow of the sacred victim, that if you can just sort of allow someone to absorb the tokenism of playing the role of the sacred victim, then you can orientate reality around that conclusion. And then so you have that conclusion, and then you can always bend the narrative to conform and to line everything to that. And the chief, I've seen the Chief Justice do this in many other issues as well. Because and you can tell that he's ideologically possessed. You can tell that he has this idolatry of the identity, but also in his lectures he speaks of it. He's a perhaps the reincarnation of Joseph Goebbels. That's what I'm thinking. That's my speculation. Vague speculation. I'm not making that a literal point, but I'm saying that is the kind of comparison that we have to realize that we're in. That's the kind of mess that we have to realize. That's the kind of fire that we're playing with in the destruction of non-racialism, in its disgusting reinterpretation, I might add, by these immoral people with dark souls. With an evil ideology, and their creep towards an ever increasing cultural totalitarianism. Anyway, let me move on to my other subjects.